I leaned against the counter, breathing heavily, watching the blood pool on the floor. Not mine, of course. My hands trembled slightly, knuckles raw and aching, but I couldn't let myself sit down just yet. The kitchen was a mess, broken glass glinting under the harsh light, a chair overturned, and that bright, ugly red staining the pristine white tiles. My kitchen. My sanctuary. This wasn't how I pictured the evening would go. I mean, who does? But let me tell you, there's something oddly therapeutic about cleaning up after a fight you've won. It's a moment to reflect, to savor the satisfaction of standing your ground. Don't get me wrong, violence isn't my first choice. But when a man disrespects you in your own home, sometimes you've got to remind him whose name is on the mortgage. Let's rewind a bit. This wasn't some bar fight or a random act of rage. No, this was personal. This was a battle for dignity, for respect, for the right to not be treated like a doormat in my own house. And the irony? The man lying unconscious on my kitchen floor wasn't some stranger. He was someone my wife, the woman I'd vowed to love and protect, had invited into our lives. I glanced at his face, swollen, bloodied, with a gash above his brow that would leave a scar, assuming he learned his lesson and lived long enough to care about scars. His teeth, well, what was left of them were scattered across the floor like broken pearls. Funny, isn't it? He walked in here with a smug smile, thinking he could bare his teeth at me. Now, he'd be lucky if he could drink through a straw for the next month. My wife. Oh, she was upstairs. Shocked, probably. Silent, definitely. I could hear her pacing, the creak of the floorboards above me. She hadn't come down yet. Not to intervene, not to defend her boyfriend. I'll admit, a small part of me wished she had. Maybe then I wouldn't have felt the full weight of her betrayal. You're probably wondering how we got here, how a peaceful, law-abiding man like me ended up in a fistfight in his own kitchen. And let me tell you, it wasn't because I went looking for trouble. Trouble came knocking on my door, smirking like it owned the place. And I answered. I didn't grow up fighting. My father always said the strongest man in the room was the one who could walk away. And I believed that for a long time. But some situations, some people, don't let you walk away. Some people mistake your patience for weakness, your silence for fear. And tonight, patience wasn't on the menu. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, each second punctuating the heavy silence. I grabbed a towel, crouching to clean up the blood. The motion felt mechanical, like my body was working on autopilot while my mind replayed the events that led to this moment. Every insult, every smirk, every audacious word that left his mouth. How he strutted into my house like he owned it, like I was just some insignificant obstacle in his way. But here's the thing about obstacles. Some of them don't move. Some of them hit back. As I scrubbed the floor, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had fueled me earlier had simmered down, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't about proving myself to him, or even to my wife. It was about reclaiming what was mine, my pride, my peace, my home. I stood up, tossing the towel into the sink, and looked around. The kitchen was still a mess, but it was my mess. My space. And as for him, well, let's just say he won't be coming back here anytime soon. This was just the beginning of the story. But even then, I knew one thing for sure. Some people need to learn the hard way. And tonight, I was their teacher. It wasn't always like this. For years, I thought we had a good thing going. Sure, we had our ups and downs, like any couple. But I never thought betrayal would be part of our story. I didn't even notice the cracks until they became impossible to ignore. It started subtly, little things I could have easily dismissed if I hadn't been paying attention. Her phone, for instance. It used to sit on the counter while we ate dinner. Now, it was glued to her hand, face down and on silent. At first, I thought it was work, maybe a stressful deadline or some client needing her attention. But it wasn't just work. I'd walk into the room, and she'd stop texting mid-sentence, her thumb hovering over the screen like she'd been caught red-handed. She started coming home later, too, with vague excuses about traffic or last-minute errands. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband who saw ghosts where there were none, so I let it slide. Trust, I thought. That's the foundation of any good marriage. But trust doesn't mean blind stupidity. One night, I decided to ask her outright. She had been unusually distant that evening, and the tension between us felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Is something wrong? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. What do you mean? You've been different. Distant. Is there something I should know? For a moment, she looked at me like she wanted to say something, like the truth was bubbling just beneath the surface. But then she shrugged, plastering on a fake smile. You're imagining things. I'm fine. Fine. That word hung in the air like a bad smell. I knew better, but I let it drop for the moment. A week later, I found out I wasn't imagining things after all. She came home late that evening, her hair tousled, her lipstick smudged, details she'd never let slip before. She dropped her bag on the counter and avoided looking at me. Can we talk? She said, her voice hesitant. Of course, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She took a deep breath, as though bracing herself. I've met someone. I stared at her, the words hanging in the air like a slap to the face. You've met someone? I repeated, incredulous. It's not what you think, she said quickly. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. That was the moment something inside me shifted. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was disbelief, the kind of disbelief that makes you question your own reality. I stared at the woman I'd shared my life with, wondering how we got here. And you felt it was appropriate to bring this up now? I asked, my voice calm but cold. She fidgeted with her hands, avoiding my gaze. I think we need to talk about us. About where this is going. I didn't have an answer for that. Instead, I nodded and walked out of the room. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. The next morning, I woke up with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. If she thought she could replace me, she had another thing coming. What I didn't know then was just how bold her new boyfriend would be. I didn't have to wait long to meet him. She made sure of that. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the living room, trying to distract myself with a book that I wasn't really reading. The house was quiet, which made the sound of a car pulling into the driveway feel like a siren. I peeked through the curtains, and that's when I saw him. He stepped out of the car like he owned the place, wearing a leather jacket and sunglasses, his smirk as wide as the front door. I didn't need an introduction to know who he was. The way he walked, swaggering, confident, arrogant, told me everything. She came in first, holding the door open for him like a hostess welcoming a VIP guest. Darling, she said, her voice strained and overly cheerful, this is Ronan. Ronan. The name hung in the air like a challenge. He walked in without waiting for an invitation, looking around the house like he was appraising it. Nice place, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. A bit quaint, but it's got charm. I stood up slowly, taking my time. I wanted him to feel the weight of my gaze. Ronan, I said, my voice steady. Nice to meet you. He didn't shake my hand. Instead, he stuffed his hands in his pockets and tilted his head, looking me up and down like he was sizing me up. You must be the husband, he said, grinning like it was a joke. Last I checked, I replied, keeping my tone even. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My wife shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to notice as Ronan sauntered over to the couch and sat down like he owned it. He leaned back, spreading his arms across the cushions, and looked at me with that same smug smile. So, he began. I figured it was about time we met. After all, it's a bit awkward, don't you think? Me and her, and you. I clenched my fists, but I kept my composure. Awkward isn't the word I'd use, I said. He laughed, a short, mocking sound that made my blood boil. Relax, man. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just thought we could clear the air, you know? Get everything out in the open. Everything's already clear, I replied. You're in my house, sitting on my couch, talking to me like I'm the intruder. That's pretty clear. He didn't like that. His grin faltered for a split second before he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Look, he said, lowering his voice like he was about to share a secret. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. I'm here now. Things are changing, and you can either accept that or not. It took everything in me not to laugh in his face. The audacity of this man, walking into my home and acting like he had the upper hand. I'll keep that in mind, I said, my voice as calm as I could make it. But inside, I was anything but calm. He leaned back again, looking around the room with that same condescending smirk. You've done all right for yourself, haven't you? Nice little setup here. I guess she liked the stability. I didn't respond. I just stared at him, letting the silence speak for itself. It wasn't fear that kept me quiet. It was strategy. Let him talk. Let him show his hand. After a few more minutes of posturing and veiled insults, he got up and stretched like he was bored. Well, he said, looking at my wife, this was fun, but we should probably get going. She avoided my gaze, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. I'll just grab my bag, she said, hurrying out of the room. That left me alone with him. He looked at me again, that smug smile returning. You're a patient guy, he said. I respect that. But patience only gets you so far. I didn't say a word as he walked out the door. He gave me a mock salute. See you around, buddy? And just like that, he was gone. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't angry, not yet. No, anger would come later. Right now, all I felt was cold determination. Because one thing was certain, the next time Ronan set foot in my house, things would end very differently. I should have known he'd come back. Guys like Ronan always do. They thrive on the sound of their own voice and the smell of someone else's fear. He probably thought he was doing me a favor, gracing me with his presence again, like his existence was a gift I should be grateful for. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock at the door. Not a polite knock, either. Loud and impatient, the kind that demands attention. I opened it, and there he was, leaning casually against the door frame with that same infuriating smirk. "Hope you don't mind me stopping by," he said, brushing past me before I could answer. I didn't mind yet, but I knew I was about to. He made himself at home, walking straight into the kitchen without so much as a glance back. My wife trailed in after him, looking more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen her. She mouthed something I couldn't quite catch. An apology, maybe. An excuse? It didn't matter. Ronan was already rummaging through my fridge. "You've got good taste in beer," he said, pulling out a bottle and cracking it open on the edge of the counter like a caveman. The cap flew off, landing on the floor. He didn't even bother to pick it up. I followed him into the kitchen, leaning against the doorway and crossing my arms. "Is there a reason you're here?" I asked. He took a swig of the beer, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Yeah," he said casually. "We need to talk. Man to man." I glanced at my wife, who looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. "About what?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "About her," he said, nodding toward my wife like she was some sort of prize he'd won. "And about you." The way he said it, so condescending, so smug, made my blood boil. But I kept my composure. I wasn't about to let him see me lose control. Ronan stepped closer, closing the space between us. "Look, I get it," he said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "It must be hard, watching a guy like me come in and take over. But hey, life's not fair, right?" "Right," I said, my voice as cold as steel. He smirked, mistaking my calm for submission. "See, I knew you'd understand. And I appreciate that. Really, I do. But here's the thing. This house, it doesn't really feel like it belongs to you anymore. You know what I mean." That was it. The moment I knew this wouldn't end with words. "I don't think I do," I said, stepping forward. Ronan took another swig of the beer, clearly enjoying himself. "Come on, man. You've got to see it. She's with me now. That means this house, this life, it's mine, too." I stared at him, letting his words sink in. He was close now, too close. Close enough to smell the arrogance on him. "And what happens?" I asked slowly, "if I don't agree?" Ronan chuckled, setting the beer bottle down on the counter with a loud clink. "Then maybe I'll have to convince you." He pushed me, not hard, but enough to make his point, enough to show me he wasn't joking. I didn't move. He pushed me again, harder this time. "What's the matter, old man? Afraid to stand up for yourself?" That was the moment. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. I stepped forward, closing the gap between us until we were nose to nose. My voice was quiet, controlled. "You've got about 3 seconds to get out of my house," I said. "Or this is going to end badly for you." Ronan grinned, baring his teeth like the predator he thought he was. "I'd like to see you try." Challenge accepted. The kitchen was about to become a battleground, and I was ready. He was grinning like a fool, his overconfidence practically dripping off him. Ronan really thought he had me figured out. A meek husband, a pushover, the kind of man who'd step aside and let someone else waltz in and take everything. But here's the thing about guys like him. They've never met someone like me. It happened fast. I grabbed the beer bottle he'd so carelessly placed on my counter and smashed it to the floor. The sound startled him, his smirk faltering for the first time. That was my opening. Before he could react, I shoved him back, hard, sending him stumbling into the edge of the counter. His cocky grin turned into a grimace of pain, and I stepped closer, towering over him. "You think this is a game?" I asked, my voice low and cold. He pushed himself off the counter, his bravado returning. "Big talk for a guy who hasn't thrown a punch yet," he sneered, swinging wildly at me. "Rookie mistake." I ducked easily, stepping inside his reach and landing a solid punch to his ribs. He doubled over with a grunt, and I didn't let up. Another punch, this time to his jaw, wiped that smirk off his face for good. He staggered back, clutching his mouth, and I could see the blood on his hands. You broke my tooth, he stammered, his voice muffled. Not just one, I replied, advancing on him. He swung again, this time catching my shoulder, but it was weak, desperate. I grabbed his arm and twisted, using his own momentum to send him crashing into the kitchen island. He hit the edge hard, collapsing onto the floor with a groan. I stood over him, breathing heavily. You come into my house, I said, my voice rising with each word. You insult me. You disrespect me. And you think I'm just going to let it slide? He tried to get up, but I planted a foot on his chest, pinning him down. Here's the thing about being an alpha, I continued, my tone ice cold. It's not about who can shout the loudest or act the toughest. It's about knowing when you've already lost. I reached down, grabbing him by the collar and hauling him to his feet. He swayed unsteadily, blood dripping from his split lip and broken teeth. You're done, I said, shoving him toward the door. Get out of my house, and don't you ever come back. But Ronan, stubborn and stupid, wasn't ready to quit. He lunged at me with a guttural roar, swinging wildly again. I sidestepped easily, grabbing a nearby pan and cracking it against the side of his head. He crumpled to the floor like a sack of bricks, groaning in pain. This time, I crouched down beside him, making sure he could hear every word. You're lucky I have restraint, I said, because if it were up to me, you wouldn't be walking out of here at all. I grabbed his arm and dragged him toward the door, his protests weak and slurred. Blood smeared across the floor as I pulled him out, tossing him onto the porch like the trash he was. He lay there, gasping for breath, his face a mess of cuts and bruises. This isn't over, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Oh, it's over, I replied, stepping back inside and slamming the door behind me. The silence that followed was deafening. My hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. But I felt a strange sense of calm. I'd stood my ground. I defended my home. I turned back to the kitchen, surveying the mess, broken glass, bloodstains, and overturned chairs. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. And Ronan, well, let's just say he wouldn't be baring his teeth at anyone anytime soon. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that seemed to echo through the entire house. Outside, I could hear Ronan groaning, probably trying to pick himself up off the porch. Good luck with that. I didn't care what happened to him after he left my property, as long as he never stepped foot here again. I leaned against the door, catching my breath. The adrenaline was still surging through my veins, leaving me shaky but oddly focused. My knuckles throbbed, the skin split in a couple of places, but I welcomed the pain. It felt right. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Blood streaked across the floor, broken glass glittering under the overhead light. The chair he'd knocked over lay on its side, one of its legs bent at an awkward angle. The beer bottle he'd smashed earlier had left a jagged dent in the counter. It was chaos, pure and simple, but it was my chaos. I started cleaning up, grabbing a roll of paper towels and a bucket of soapy water. Each swipe of the cloth felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of my space. This was my home, my sanctuary, and no one, not Ronan, not anyone, was going to take that away from me. As I worked, I couldn't help but replay the events in my mind. The fight, the insults, the look of shock on his face when he realized I wasn't the pushover he thought I was. That moment would stay with me for a long time. There's something satisfying about watching arrogance crumble. He'd come into my house full of swagger and bravado, thinking he could intimidate me. But in the end, he was the one crawling away, bloodied and broken. I glanced at the clock. It was late, but I didn't feel tired. My wife still hadn't come downstairs. I could hear her footsteps above me, pacing back and forth. She was probably in shock, unsure of what to do or say. I didn't care. She'd made her choices, and now she'd have to live with the consequences. As I scrubbed the last of the blood off the floor, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. When I finally tossed the dirty rags into the trash, I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table. My hands were still trembling, but it wasn't from fear or anger anymore. It was from relief. For weeks, I'd felt like a stranger in my own home, walking on eggshells around a woman who clearly didn't respect me. Ronan was just the final straw, the spark that lit the fire. But now, things were different. I'd drawn a line in the sand, and I wasn't about to back down. Ronan had learned his lesson the hard way. He'd strutted into my house like a lion baring his teeth, only to leave as a battered cub licking his wounds. I smirked at the thought of him trying to explain his injuries to someone. What happened to you, man? They'd ask. And he'd have to admit he got his teeth knocked out by the husband of the woman he thought he could steal. Poetic justice, if you ask me. The house was quiet now, save for the occasional creak of floorboards above. The mess was cleaned up, the kitchen back in order. But the tension lingered, heavy and oppressive. I knew the fight with Ronan wasn't the end of it. There was still the matter of my wife. I stared at the empty glass in my hand, my mind racing. How do you confront someone who's betrayed you so completely? How do you even begin to unravel the mess they've made of your life? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the same man I'd been a few hours ago. I'd stood my ground, defended my home, and proved that I wasn't to be underestimated. And as for Ronan, well, let's just say he won't be enjoying solid food anytime soon. The house was eerily quiet now. Ronan was gone, his bloodied ego left somewhere on the front porch. And I had finished cleaning the wreckage he caused in the kitchen. But the real battle wasn't over yet. I could hear her upstairs, her pacing like the ticking of a time bomb. It was time. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood beneath my feet punctuating the tension hanging in the air. My knuckles still throbbed, and the adrenaline that had carried me through the fight was long gone, replaced by something colder, resolve. When I opened the bedroom door, she stopped pacing and turned to look at me. For the first time in years, she seemed small, fragile, like a glass vase on the edge of a shelf. Her eyes darted to my hands, taking in the bruises and the dried blood, then flicked away just as quickly. You didn't have to do that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I let the door swing shut behind me. Do what? Defend myself? Defend my home? Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't respond. What were you expecting, exactly? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Did you think I'd roll out the red carpet for him? Invite him to stay for dinner? Let him parade around my house like he owns it. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the comforter like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I didn't think it would come to this. Then you weren't thinking at all. Her head snapped up at that, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, I interrupted. Explain why you thought it was a good idea to bring him here, to our home, to my home. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, the words sticking in her throat. I gave her a moment, but when the silence stretched on, I stepped closer. You owe me that much, I said quietly. After everything you've done, the least you can do is tell me why. She stared at the floor, her voice trembling when she finally spoke. I didn't mean for it to happen. I barked out a laugh, harsh and humorless. Didn't mean for what to happen? The affair? The disrespect? Or inviting him into my house to gloat about it? Her head shot up again, and this time there were tears in her eyes. It wasn't supposed to be like this. But it is, I said, crossing my arms. So, now what? What's your plan? Because I can tell you one thing. He's not coming back here. Ever. She flinched at the finality in my tone. I didn't know he'd act like that, she whispered. I thought he just wanted to talk. And you believed him? I shook my head, incredulous. You're smarter than that. Or at least, I thought you were. Her tears spilled over then, but I didn't feel the usual pull of sympathy. Not this time. I'd given her my trust, my love, my loyalty. And she'd thrown it away for what? A man who couldn't even hold his own in a fight. I don't know how we got here, she said, her voice breaking. I sighed, the weight of the evening settling heavily on my shoulders. We got here because you made choices. Choices that disrespected me, our marriage, and everything we built together. She sobbed harder, but I didn't move to comfort her. This wasn't my mess to clean up, not anymore. You're going to have to live with those choices, I said, my voice steady. Because I'm done. I've given you every chance, every ounce of forgiveness I had in me. And this, I gestured toward the door, toward the chaos Ronan had left in his wake. This is the result. Her sobs slowed, and she looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. What happens now? That's up to you, I said simply. But let me be clear. This is my house, my life. And if you, or anyone else thinks they can walk in here and take that away from me, you're wrong. I turned and walked out, leaving her to grapple with the wreckage of her own decisions. I walked out of that room, leaving her sitting there, broken and lost. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout or scream. No dramatic gestures, that wasn't my style. But in my heart, I knew something irreversible had just happened. It was over. For too long, I'd been holding on, convincing myself that things could be fixed, that whatever cracks had formed in our marriage could somehow be patched up with time and effort. But tonight had ripped those cracks wide open, revealing the truth beneath. Trust shattered, loyalty abandoned, respect non-existent. I stood in the hallway, staring at nothing in particular, letting the weight of it all settle over me. The house was silent now, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. The fight was over, but the battle wasn't. I made my way downstairs, needing space to think. The kitchen was clean, the bloodstains scrubbed away, the glass swept up. The physical mess was gone, but the emotional mess lingered, thick and suffocating. I poured myself a drink, not alcohol, just water, and sat at the kitchen table, staring into the glass like it held answers. It didn't, of course, but it gave me something to focus on while my mind raced. Where do you go from here? How do you rebuild when the foundation has been torn out from under you? The answer was both simple and complex. You start with yourself. For years, I'd been living for us, for her. Every decision I made, every step I took, had been with our life together in mind. But now, it was time to focus on me. I thought about the man I'd been when we first met, confident, ambitious, unshakable. Somewhere along the way, that man had gotten lost, buried under the weight of compromise and routine. I didn't resent her for that. It was part of life, part of love. But now that love was gone, and it was time to find him again. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. A text from an old friend I hadn't seen in years. Hey, man. Long time no see. Let's catch up soon. I stared at the message for a moment before replying, let's do it. I'll call you tomorrow. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. Reconnecting with the people and things I'd neglected was the first step toward reclaiming my life. As I sat there, the events of the evening played over in my mind like a movie reel. The look on Ronan's face when he realized he'd underestimated me. The way my wife had crumbled under the weight of her own choices. The silence that followed it all, heavy and unrelenting. I didn't feel regret. Not for the fight, not for the confrontation, not for standing up for myself. If anything, I felt a strange sense of peace. Ronan was a lesson, a painful, humiliating lesson for both of us. For him, it was a reminder that arrogance and bravado only get you so far. For her, it was a wake-up call, a stark realization of the consequences of betrayal. And for me, it was a turning point. I stood up, finishing my drink and setting the glass in the sink. The house felt different now, quieter, emptier, but also lighter, like a weight had been lifted. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of starting over, of rebuilding, of rediscovering who I was and what I wanted. As I headed upstairs to grab a fresh set of clothes, I paused at the foot of the staircase, looking up toward the closed bedroom door. I hope you figure things out, I said quietly, not expecting an answer. And then I walked away. Days passed, then weeks, and the silence in the house became its own kind of conversation. She stayed upstairs most of the time, avoiding me, as if the weight of what happened had left her too ashamed to face me. I didn't go out of my way to check on her. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a canyon too wide to bridge. I focused on myself, piece by piece, like rebuilding a house after a storm. The first step was reconnecting with the friends and hobbies I'd neglected. I went back to the gym, not out of vanity, but to feel strong again. I started reading books I'd put off, and for the first time in years, I found peace in my own company. But her regret, that was a storm brewing on its own. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house filled with the kind of quiet that only comes at dusk, she came downstairs. I was in the living room, a book open in my lap, though I wasn't really reading. She stood there, hesitating in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft, tentative. I looked up, not surprised but not particularly moved, either. Talk about what? She stepped into the room, clutching her hands together like she didn't know what to do with them. About everything. About us. There is no us, I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. Not anymore. She flinched, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she sank into the chair across from me, looking at me like she was searching for some sign of the man she once knew. I made a mistake, she began, her voice trembling. I let my selfishness ruin everything, and I don't know how to fix it. Her words hung in the air, but they didn't touch me the way they once might have. The part of me that would have rushed to comfort her, to reassure her, was gone. She'd killed it, little by little, with every lie, every betrayal, every choice she made to put someone else above me. You can't fix it, I said simply. Some things can't be undone. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, as if denying my words would make them less true. I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't realize what I had, what I was throwing away. I thought he was different. And now you know he wasn't, I replied. But that doesn't change the fact that you chose him. You brought him into our lives, into my home. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I watched her, feeling a pang of something, not pity, not anger, but maybe sadness for what could have been. I miss us, she said between sobs. I miss the life we had. I miss you. I leaned back, crossing my arms. The life we had is gone. And the person you miss, he's gone, too. You can't expect to burn down a house and still want to live in it. Her sobbing quieted, and she looked at me, her eyes desperate. Can't we at least try? Please? I'll do anything. I shook my head, standing up. It's not about what you'll do now. It's about what you've already done. She stayed in the chair, her shoulders slumped, the weight of regret pressing down on her. But I didn't feel the need to stay and watch. I'd said my piece, and I wasn't interested in rehashing the past. As I left the room, I heard her whisper something, a faint, broken, "I'm sorry." But sorry doesn't build trust. Sorry doesn't erase betrayal. And sorry doesn't bring back what's already been lost. The house was quiet now, not the oppressive kind of silence that had settled over it after Ronan and the fight, but a peaceful stillness, the kind that felt like a deep breath after a storm. She had left 2 days ago, her bags packed, her face streaked with tears, but no argument this time. Just silence and the weight of inevitability. I didn't stop her. I didn't beg her to stay or make her promises I couldn't keep. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. Now, it was time to move on. I spent the first day rearranging the house, reclaiming every corner she had touched. Her things were gone, leaving empty spaces that somehow made the house feel larger, lighter. I rearranged the furniture, repainted the walls, and replaced the bed linens with ones I actually liked. The kitchen was my last project. I scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, replaced the dented counter, and bought new chairs for the table. This was my space now, and I wanted it to feel like mine. The second day, I stood at the front door and looked out at the driveway where Ronan's car had once been parked. The memory of him swaggering up to my house still made me shake my head. He thought he was the lion, but he'd left as nothing more than a toothless cub. I wondered if he'd learned his lesson, if he'd looked in the mirror and realized that arrogance and bravado were no substitute for respect and honor. Probably not. Guys like him rarely do. As for me, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is exhausting, and I didn't have the energy to carry it around. What I felt now was something more profound, clarity. I'd spent years bending over backward to make other people happy, to keep the peace, to be the nice guy. And where had it gotten me? Betrayed in my own home by the person I thought I could trust the most. But that betrayal had taught me something important. I wasn't a doormat. I wasn't someone to be walked over, dismissed, or disrespected. I was stronger than that. And I'd proven it, to Ronan, to her, and most importantly, to myself. The text from my friend buzzed on my phone again. Dinner tomorrow? My treat. I smiled and typed back, looking forward to it. Rebuilding my life wasn't going to happen overnight, but I wasn't in a hurry. For the first time in years, I had time to focus on myself, to figure out who I was and what I wanted. As I sat on the couch, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, I thought about the future. Not the painful, complicated mess I'd left behind, but the clean slate in front of me. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't looking back. The finality of that thought brought a small, satisfied smile to my face. This was my house, my life, and no one was going to take that away from me again. And as for Ronan, well, the next time he thought about baring his teeth at someone, he'd have to remember what it was like to lose a few of them. I leaned back, letting the calm wash over me. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. For the first time in a long time, I felt free.